I write a great deal about marriage online, and I even wrote a book about Christian marriage, 333 pages on Word, outlining the main biblical points. I love marriage. I believe it is extremely important, and I want to see more and better marriages. I only rarely have written about the marriage bed or physical intimacy because there is not a great deal about this in biblical doctrine, beyond the point that intimacy or sex is a responsibility, as is having children. However, I want to write about the marriage bed today because I hear so many people, men especially, saying that their spouse refuses intimacy, often for months or years on end. I have known one colleague who told me this, but reading online, judging by the comments of men, it appears to be an enormous and destructive problem in marriage. It's not a mere annoyance, it is a marriage destroyer. The more common problem is that women withhold marital affection from their husbands. However, having done some amount of marriage counseling myself, I have come across wives who have the same problem and are left feeling terrible because their husbands will not touch them for years, not just sexually, but even with ordinary affection. In this teaching, I am primarily addressing the problem with wives refusing intimacy with their husbands because it is the greater problem and wrong on even more levels. The fact that intimacy is a duty in marriage should not be difficult to understand for the Christian. It is something every person going into marriage ought to know beforehand. When you marry, you become one flesh, and you share your body with your spouse. What was formerly two bodies have now become one. If pastors give marriage preparation to young couples, the duty of intimacy along with the responsibility to have children needs to be taught. We know beyond a doubt that this is a part of marriage by nature because of the teaching that man and wife become one flesh, and because of the explanation in 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5. Let's look at the second first. After briefly acknowledging that celibacy is the highest calling, Paul insists that because of temptation to commit sexual immorality, men and women should get married. He then explains, "Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but his wife does. Do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer, and come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." This passage could not be clearer. Not only does Paul instruct husband and wife to render due affection, but he goes so far as to say neither one really has authority over their own body. Their body belongs to their spouse. Then he explicitly teaches not to deprive your spouse except with consent from your spouse. Do so temporarily for a spiritual cause, and then resume being intimate. That means the only thing that requires mutual desire is fasting from intimacy. Intimacy does not require mutual desire, but only the desire of one spouse. The other may not refuse. You should know that the word translated above as deprive is more commonly translated in the New Testament as defraud or cheat. Indeed, when James rebukes the corrupt wealthy and says, "Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out," he is using the same word for defraud as we see here, James 5:4. Paul is teaching husband and wife not to defraud their spouse. To deprive them of intimacy is certainly an act of cheating them, as intimacy is exactly what you owe them. If you don't give someone what you owe them, you are cheating that person. Here, owing intimacy is a part of the marriage union, and that debt began when the husband and wife said their vows. They agreed to pay that to their partner, and now they must. If I told you that I would give you $10,000 for your automobile, and then you gave me your automobile, and I refused to give you the money, what have I done? I have cheated you. I just robbed you by cheating. Marriage must not be like this. I realize countless people hate this teaching, including countless Christians, but that is what Scripture teaches. You may not refuse your spouse. Affection is what he is due. That affection is something you owe because you are married, and it is due the other because it is a responsibility. It basically belongs to them. You may not withhold intimacy any more than a boss may withhold due wages. It is not yours to withhold in the first place. It belongs to the other. This is a natural extension of the fact that God made man and wife one flesh in the garden, and all marriage is a reflection of this. Genesis 2:23-25. Jesus specifically draws from Genesis in giving his teaching on being one flesh, and how it means that God has made them one, and man may not tear apart a marriage. Mark 10:6-9. The phrase one flesh may have a variety of spiritual meanings, but it is also a simple physical meaning. Man and wife will share their bodies as one. Their two bodies will become one body through marital intimacy. It is this rooting in marriage which clearly makes sense of the apostles' teaching that the man's body belongs to his wife and the wife's body belongs to her man. The two who once were separate are now one flesh. The fact that it is taught plainly in Scripture, and that it comes with natural marriage from the start of creation, means that if a wife is withholding intimacy from her husband, she is committing sin. There is no excuse for not knowing that, and any woman who does this needs to confess and repent of her sin. She should confess to God, as well as to her husband, and then cease doing it. For a wife, it also means she is refusing to be submissive, which is further her role and responsibility. A submissive woman does not withhold her responsibility to her husband, and in fact she does not refuse her husband's desire in general, unless it were clearly a sinful one. She does what her husband wants because he is her husband. Any wife who is withholding intimacy needs to be rooted better, or even, for the first time, in a submissive heart. Submitting will lead her to never consider denying him in the first place. She will move with him easily as his hands and his feet. It is furthermore unloving to withhold sex. That is because a loving woman, simply by matter of love and not duty, would want to please her husband, and will even find satisfaction in pleasing him. She wants him to be happy and fulfilled. A wife, as her man's helper for the rest of her days, loves her man in part through her helper role, being there to aid him in reaching his goals and in fulfilling his will, in those ways which are appropriate for a wife to help. Refusing intimacy goes directly against her role as a helper, just as it goes against love in principle. It is a sin on multiple levels, more levels for a woman than for a man who practices it. Pastors and other ministers cannot be afraid of talking about this problem directly. The ordinary Christian brother who counsels friends about marriage cannot be shy either. Intimacy as a marital duty needs to be taught, explained, and defended. Problems such as denying intimacy need to be addressed, and women who practice this need to be confronted, taught on this subject, and rebuked for their sin. Women are given a free pass too often just because they are women. Yet women can be just as wicked sinners as men, and should not get off lightly for sin. They should not be allowed to try and shift the blame to their husbands, or to make excuses either. Their husbands do not need to be perfect to receive what is due them, nor do they need to jump through any hoops or meet any level of performance. Husbands simply receive that from their wives because it is due them, regardless of how perfect they are. Women need to own up. They need to face the cold light of truth by all around them and be held responsible for their sin. In an era which likes to label nearly anything abuse, a woman refusing to go to bed with her husband is also abuse, and of the real and severe kind. She should be seen as an abuser and responded to as such. We should remember that having intimacy on a mere physical level is not the only goal. Joining in the marriage bed is not only going through the acts. A wife should have a sincere desire to express her heart to her husband in the marriage bed. She should express her love, desire for him, and submission to him in an act we could call a physical manifestation of marital love. She should also treat it as a responsibility to make it pleasurable for her husband, because that comes with the act and because her husband desires it. A wife should not refuse what her husband enjoys. She ought to find out how he likes to be pleased and then do it for him. This makes intimacy joyful for them both, and women are very fulfilled in bringing their men pleasure. It is an act of giving close to a woman's heart. That is why a woman who simply says, "Oh, well, I guess I'll do it for him," but then acts in a cold and loveless manner in bed, is half cheating him anyway, almost as if she had refused him. Intimacy comes with satisfaction and connection, and it should be the goal for her that those things are present. There are a variety of reasons that women may selfishly refuse intimacy. One of the most common is that they are prideful and like to rule over their husbands. This is a part of the fall and is prophesied in Genesis 3:16. Since their bodies are often the easiest weapons they have, they use their bodies to control their husbands and in general to put them down. They can use their bodies to get even with their husbands if they are angry, or to punish them otherwise. They can use their bodies to reward their husbands when their husbands have bent to their will. It is ultimately about power and control. It brings pleasure on a certain level to degrade a man and make him grovel, or to know you hurt a man. Even though a woman can sense her guilt and doesn't like some of the problems her behavior causes, there is a great attraction to this kind of control due to her pride and rebellion. Pride is the enemy. A woman may also withhold due affection because she has an adulterous desire for other men. Withholding affection in her mind may cause her man to find another woman, and once he does, she can have her excuse to get a divorce. She makes him miserable until he leaves. Such a plan may meet her goals by allowing her to meet another man, or simply to get financial reward through divorce, which women often receive. She gets what she wants, and who will hold her accountable? No one. Beyond being controlling or adulterous, some women simply have never loved or desired their husbands, but only got married for other reasons, such as the money. Once they have gotten their ill-begotten gains, they give up on intimacy because they simply do not care for their husbands. They don't want to sleep with a man they despise, and they have never taken this responsibility which comes with marriage seriously. They have always been out for themselves. One further reason women commit this sin is because they are hooked on control in general, not just control over their husbands. Just as many women labeled anorexic are attached to their desire to go long periods of time without eating, some women who withhold intimacy are similarly motivated by a desire to go long periods of time without it. They get a strange sense of satisfaction through that level of self-control and false sense of achievement, and they seek out that satisfaction despite experiencing negative consequences from it. It is an out-of-control desire for control. Some would label it a mental disorder. Many men are sadly led to believe that this behavior is expected in marriage. Women just stop having intimacy, or they stop caring for their man's pleasure in bed. That is a cultural meme by now, and considered by some a source of humor. It paints marriage as a miserable experience with two unhappy and unloving people. Men are secondly led to believe they have to be hands-off about the problem, and they cannot use their authority to tell their wife what to do. They just have to wait until some mystical forces, controlled by the deity, inspire her to do the right thing. They've got to wait and pray, or talk, or go to counseling, yet both views are false. In a normal marriage, husband and wife are intimate frequently, and wives enjoy doing that for their husbands. They find it natural to satisfy their husbands. Intimacy is not some horrible, oppressive act, but is normal and joyful, and men and women do it all the time. There is nothing normal about a cold and loveless marriage, and it means someone is doing something wrong. Nor do men simply need to wait and pray, if their wife refuses intimacy. Despite what your pastor may tell you, you may use your authority as the husband to tell your wife she has to do it. You can insist. As the head of the home, she needs to respect you and to respect your will to be intimate. In our home, my wife never refuses me affection. There are rare occasions when she has had a very long day and is feeling down, when she asks to postpone it to tomorrow. I usually agree with this, and she has no problem fulfilling that the next day, doing so eagerly. However, if I find the reasons to put it off rather weak, or if I just really want it anyway, I will insist. When I do that, my wife complies, and there is no problem. Intimacy is no great burden. No one got harmed. That is the way things work in a normal household when the husband is the head of his wife, and the wife is submissive to him. It's very simple, and people who try to make it difficult and fraught with complications are just trying to undermine what is good. Don't listen to them. A man can insist on intimacy, and his wife needs to obey. The harms that a woman causes when she refuses her husband's desire in bed are numerous and traumatic. Intimacy between man and wife breeds contentment, peace between them, emotional closeness, and a general sense of security and fulfillment. Withholding intimacy brings about the opposite. It creates a barrier between man and wife, a satanic act considering the unity that they are to have. It breeds bitterness and resentment in the man being mistreated. It tends to lower his sense of self and his sense of manhood. It creates emotional pain. It makes interactions between man and wife generally colder and less helpful to one another. It sucks much of the love out of a marriage. The long-term results are often that a man turns to adultery to fulfill his needs, and divorce is the frequent end. Because of the nature of the sin, if the man turns to adultery for this reason, his wife is in part responsible for it and should admit her own part in the act. The refusal of intimacy is one among many reasons some men simply refuse to get married because it sounds like a miserable experience and they will have no control over what happens. This damages marriage in the entire society when people write it off as a bad option. You can be sure that many of the problematic marriages you see or hear about involve refusing affection as a component. It may not be talked about in all cases, and some people are ashamed to talk about it. When you see greatly damaged marriages, when you see couples that end in divorce, you can be confident that in many of them withholding intimacy was a factor, and in some it was the main factor. It is poison for a marriage, just as it is poison for love. Women need to give up trying to be in control. That is the killer. Trying to be in control is the opposite of what a woman should be learning to be. It is the opposite of what a young woman should be learning to prepare for in marriage. A wife should be giving up control. She needs to surrender to her husband, body and soul, and accept him as her Lord. He has Christ-like kingship over her. 1 Corinthians 11:3. This is one of the few things truly at the heart of marriage. The woman bows to her man as king. Just as the fall into sin led Eve to try to rule over her husband, sanctification of a woman leads her to submit to her husband. She even needs to be humble enough to submit to men in other domains, which is true all of the time in the churches, and should be true at least most of the time in civic society. She is learning humility. She is putting on Christ, who obeyed the Father even to the point of death. She is being a model of the church, which does not rebel against Christ or resist him, but which gently follows him as her Lord. The wife too gently follows her husband without resistance. Ephesians 5:24. She nurtures the quiet and gentle spirit. 1 Peter 3:3-4. She bears the modest and unassuming heart. 1 Timothy 2:9-10, which is beautiful in holiness. She becomes part of the picture of salvation itself. The Christian feminist simply does not exist except by denying Christ. Women also need to know, just as men do, that marriage is not about their own desires. That's the tough one to accept for many women who have either romanticized marriage or viewed it as a source of filthy lucre. But it's not about our desires, even if it does fulfill us in the long run. Marriage is rooted in our responsibilities, which come once we have made the vows. It does not matter how much emotion you feel towards your spouse. It does not matter if you are in the mood to do what you have to do. I don't have to be in a special mood either to go to work, or to provide for my home, or to do the Bible readings with the kids. Both husband and wife enter marriage with duties they have to fulfill, and intimacy is one of them, just as much as any other. If it were just about our personality and desire, it would ultimately not be a marriage. One of the reasons I felt confident going into my marriage is the very fact I knew it was not all about my will and on my personality. I wouldn't be depending on myself. Our union is rooted in Jesus Christ, and it is all for his purpose to love one another, to witness to Christ, and to bear and raise children. He told us already what we need to do. None of that changes with my feelings or the day. None of that changes whether I am rich or poor, or how fondly I and my wife feel about each other. It's just a given, and we do those things until one of us passes away. If you don't believe me about this topic, and I've been happily married now going on 16 years, believe the Bible, which is above me in authority and in wisdom. You may not withhold your body from your spouse. You bring misery if you do. It is sin. Considering the scale of the problem, it is something we need to be very active in addressing on multiple forums. I believe if we address it, both with new couples and with those long married, we will see better and longer lasting marriages and homes which are better witness to Christ. We will see less divorce. Unity in one flesh marriage, just as unity in the church, helps to show Christ to the world and to bring men to salvation. It will lead the children born from the marriage to know the Lord, and it will bring friends, acquaintances, colleagues to know the Lord. The miracle of two becoming one is not far less than the miracle of new life in the womb. It is a God-joined new creation. The intimacy reflected in that new creation is the intimacy of the Godhead itself, of the Trinity. There must be closeness on all levels between a man and his wife, and they should enjoy each other's bodies freely, with both desire and love. They should want the other to feel great delight in the marriage bed. Nothing separates them except death.